Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending our webinar today. My name is Alex Kramer, and I'll do a little introduction here in a second. Just some housekeeping stuff. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A section. I'll try to get to them probably at the end on that side. If you have any questions that you don't want to have public or you want to chat with me after, my email is alex@ebacon.com. Put that in the chat if you want that. Sometimes there's more personal questions people want to ask about AI or hiring or that kind of stuff on that side. So without further ado, let's get started here. So today we're going to be talking about where are we seeing AI and HR impacting us? And what is some of the good stuff we're seeing, which is for you, the bad stuff we're seeing, which is unfortunately some of the hiring stuff and the unknown stuff we're seeing, which is actually a little bit more pertinent to me as an engineer. So a little bit about myself and about eBacon. If you've never heard of eBacon or you're on this call and you're like, I need a refresher. We're a software company that focuses on certified payroll and fringe benefit management mostly for the construction industry. But for the last about 20 years, we've been making HR software, payroll software, and all the things and accoutrements that go along with it. I've been at eBacon now for about 15 years. My background is in software engineering and product development. But at eBacon, I head up our IT security, product, and software engineering teams, as well as recruiting, which we'll talk a lot about in detail today, and dabble every so often in marketing like this conversation. So let's get it, enough about me. So where are we going? So we're going to talk about AI and HR, when to use it, how not to. AI and hiring, which I like to think is the ugly part of what we're seeing today, one of the ugly parts, how this is disrupting kind of an awkward market as it is. And then how is it being impacted in software for HR, which is something that everyone's still figuring out. Last year I did a webinar, what time period I did it. But the point I was trying to make last year was, this stuff is still kind of hypey. It's still kind of, we're all trying to kind of find our footing with it. And like a year later, I feel like we're still at that point. We're still kind of in that, we're trying to figure things out and how to use it. Everyone's trying to figure out how to use it. I think there's a lot of very bold claims that people are making around AI and how to use it and how it's going to take all of our jobs and all that fun stuff. But the reality of the situation on the ground is I think that there's more nuance to it and it impacts everybody in a lot of different ways. And especially if you're like working construction and a lot of other areas that we focus a lot of heavy on, it's probably less impactful to your day-to-day than if you're like a software engineer like myself or hiring engineering teams. But I do think it has some knock-on effects that you're going to see in your industry. Another thing I talked on last year was agents, and it felt like on cue. Like I was really thinking about it last year, and it became a really hot topic at a lot of conferences and a lot of conversations, like with OpenAI and Google and stuff. And they still are creating a lot of agents. But again, those haven't yet filtered themselves down as much as we would expect in the HR space today. So let's go into a quick discussion about HR and AI and HR, maybe HR and AI. When do we want to use it and when we don't want to use it? I think it's pretty helpful to know that these tools exist and that you should be, understanding how to ask questions to it. In the next slide, we'll talk about questions to ask and that kind of stuff. But you do want to use it as a tool that helps in your thinking and diagnosing problems. But you don't ever want to treat AI as if it's some kind of lawyer. AI is not that accurate. It's also prone to be hallucinating things, which means that like when we talk about how to use it in HR, you really don't want to rely on it as if it's some kind of like source material. This is not a book that you can go to and be like, oh, the HR told me I don't have to pay overtime in San Bernardino County, so I'm going to take that at its face value, right? You should probably do some fact checking on when you get the information. But it does give you a good starting point that you can get those facts. And because you can ask the questions to AI to give it the sources that it used, you can then fact check the sources that it used and then gain some value and understanding of what those sources are. It's kind of like the best way to describe it today is that AI is really taking a bunch of information from its own search material on Google Gemini. That's going to be from Google. On OpenAI, I believe they're using Bing, and it's kind of using the stuff and searching it itself and then aggregating that information and putting it into one bucket for you. But again, not everything you read on the internet is true. So you got to be careful for it. So thinking of AI, so one of the things that I think has been really cool is that if you go back 2 years ago and you said, you went to Google and you said, hey, give me a comparison between the state, the employment laws between California and Nevada. What do I have to know when I start running payroll in Nevada? Maybe some website in the world has sat down and actually put that information together in a very easily digestible way. And we have some, there's some services you can pay for that actually do that. But finding all that information might be a little bit of a research project and also kind of fraught with danger, because what if you miss something? But now with things with like Google Gemini or with ChatGPT or Claude or whatever tool you'd like to use, you can actually ask those kinds of questions, right? Give me a spreadsheet of the differences in labor laws between state A and state B. Give me the things that I have to know about as an employer before I move into this state. What are the things that are missing in my policy that aren't here, right? You can ask it those kinds of comparison questions. That is very, very helpful. And again, going back to the previous thing, it's not a lawyer, but it's going to give you that starting point that you can actually understand, and then you can use to kind of fact check, right? It gives you like that point of like, okay, it says California says that overtime's like this and Nevada's like this. What's the source for the Nevada overtime? Okay, I can double check that. Yeah, I agree with that. I can actually like use that as a real material for my policy or my planning. But the other thing that I would like to say is that where I've used AI a lot is by asking it kind of opposite questions. So like, let's say that I'm more in product. I write an email and I'm going to send it out to all of our awesome customers who are on the call here. And I like to ask the question sometimes of like, how would this be misinterpreted? Or how would someone read this? Or what am I missing in this to make this more clear? And what's amazing about a lot of the models today is that they do a pretty good job of looking at that kind of email or communication, and actually being able to give you a little bit of feedback and say, you probably want to try to write it like this, or maybe here's some other ways, or this is how somebody might interpret what you're saying here, and this is where it's not clear. And again, when you're dealing with employees, or if you're dealing with, you've got someone who's upset at you and they're writing an email to your business, you might want to use the AI stuff to what's called gut check your own emails and say, is this, does this come off as a way that I wanted to come off as? Because we all have our inherent biases. Now you have a tool that I can actually jump in there and tell you, you might be doing this wrong, right? Again, take it with a grain of salt. It's not a human being reading your thing. It's using all the historical information about writing and about blog posts, other things, how people say they think they should respond to something. But it is a helpful tool to learn on that side. On top of that, I think that the more that you can learn how to think critically and use these tools, the better off that you're going to be. So I do think that a lot of like some of the mundane aspects of a lot of customer service roles, as an example, will slowly filter away as AI can kind of like take knowledge bases, format responses, respond back to things. I think there's a lot of jobs out there that could potentially be a little bit more automated, but the critical thinking aspect and managing these things are never going to be taken away. Like the concept of having like this broad intelligence that could do everything and kind of run the world type of thing, that's pretty far off and scary and not really part of our context. But I do believe that AI agents will have that ability to do process a lot of the processes, and you'll be able to work with those. And if you're kind of looking at this and saying like, well, then holy crap, what does this mean for us in the future? One thing I'll tell you is like, the more that you, again, going back to my previous slide, the more that you can ask the right questions and have the right conversations with the tool like this, the better off you're going to be. And I actually would recommend, like, if you've got, people who are coming into the job field today and they're going, wow, there's this new tool, it's really impacting us, which we're going to talk about here in the next section, that the more they can kind of like look at their own ability to ask questions and think critically, the better off they're going to be with the tools of tomorrow. Like, it used to be like, we got to use our creativity to create the right stuff. Now critical thinking will take another potential stab at being the more impactful tool when you have to work with these things that, you got to ask questions, and then you got to ask a question, and you have to ask a question. And unfortunately today in most schools, that's not as well trained as it should be. There's been a lot of focus on STEM stuff, but that hasn't also been as impactful. But that's a whole other thing. So let's go into an area where I do think that you should be looking at a little bit of a change in your process, and it kind of depends a little bit on your industry and what you're hiring for. But hiring is, I think, one of the areas where we've seen a lot of disruption. Why? Well, first off, we're in a weird market. I mean, as of this webinar, we're kind of in a spot where there's been a lot of layoffs, especially in the tech sector in the last couple of years. We went from a boom cycle where we had a lot of hiring in actually all sectors. If people remember back to the kind of waning days of COVID, there was just a lot of hiring, a lot of just adding more headcount, and then we went down to a major loss of headcounts, and people started to kind of like lay people off as the interest rates went lower, or interest rate went higher, sorry. But like, this has also been, there's been speculation that some of AI has been impacting some of the hiring slowdowns. And actually there's a gentleman, Derek Thomas, who writes for The Atlantic, and you can grab that link there. He's done a little research asking the question, like, well, is AI actually destroying jobs for younger people? The answer is not maybe 100%. Maybe there's a little bit of truth to that statement. But where it is taking entry-level roles, it does generally take away from the people who are a little bit more new in the marketplace. And we've seen kind of like that younger people have a little bit harder time finding jobs today in the marketplace. Now, going back to AI, is that mostly AI? Depends on the industry. Some parts, there is some indication that AI is taking away some lower skilled, lower entry-level jobs. Entry-level jobs are being harder to find. There's a little bit of myth to that. There's a little bit of reality to that. But going into like your individual process, why do I call this AI job spam hell? So if you hire a remote employee today and you flip that flag for a remote employee, you're going to get a lot of noise. Why are you going to get a lot of noise? Well, first off, going back to the previous thing, I think we're at like a 4.5% unemployment rate or something like that. And we're at like maybe just enough jobs to fill those type of point. I read in a recent study. People are really trying hard to find a job today. And there's now tools out there that an employee can go on, or for a potential employee, and say, I want to apply to every job that meets these specific criteria. Here's my resume. And I want you to format my resume based off the job posting, and then just do the applying for me. Now that sounds awesome as an employee, except that from the employer side, now we're seeing lots of this like this like dump on us. And since it's a dump on us that looks pretty good, we should be getting like the best candidates in the world, except that the people who are also trying to do harm are also using that to hit our job postings. So I'll give you a good example. In our last at eBacon, we're mostly a remote company now, and we were hiring a software engineer, and I would say probably, and it was a kind of more entry level position, and I think we had probably like 1,000 resumes. But as you started to dig into these resumes, you found very quickly that those resumes were not all real people. And in fact, it was something that our recruiting team had to spend a decent amount of time kind of like making sure that those people were actually real. And if you've looked on the news, there's actually indications of like outside sources. The FBI has actually sent out some notices on like literally North Korean actors trying to get jobs in remote companies and stuff. So you actually have to be a little bit worrisome when you get like a bunch of resumes and you look at their LinkedIn profile and you talk to somebody and then, you know, they're not the same person that you're talking to, or they refuse to turn their camera on, right? Like kind of thing. So you do need to watch out for that kind of stuff. But because of all the other abilities for people to just mass post out there, it's become very very, very, very easy to just send out way too much content, or way too many resumes, which then just floods your inbox, which floods everyone's inbox, and then you're having to weed through a lot more work on that side. So what to change? So one thing, if your job requires some kind of take-home test or anything that's filled out, it's most likely being done by AI. And I'm going to go back to like our positions here. We give a take-home test to engineers because like there's been a want in the marketplace to make it a little easier for engineers to kind of prove their merit instead of having to do it live, which is not the way we do work. And historically, we've had something like a 20% pass rate on that test. And then in our last round, we had a 100% pass rate, right? Like everyone passed it. And it's not that we were trying to build something that's super hard. It's just most people didn't put the time and effort to make sure it worked properly, but the AI didn't care. And we did ask our candidates to use AI, which we don't care about because we use it sometimes here on our engineering team. But the big thing was, can you explain what the AI did? And a lot of times I couldn't do it. On top of that, and we'll talk about this, I think I added this to a slide later. If you have questions and so let's say you have let's say you post on Indeed for your job, for your hiring, and you put questions at the bottom of the Indeed posting or of any other your postings. One of our tips is actually, in order to combat this, is to have a couple questions like, oh, give us some of your hobbies, or give us, the hardest thing you've worked at work or something, some kind of question that you're asking the candidate when they apply. It's pretty apparent when that answer to that question is gibberish, or when that answer to the question matches the previous candidates that you see, right? Like when you start seeing the same thing be posted 5 or 6 times, you're like, okay, like this is just nonsense. I can kind of just move on from this resume. It's almost like a canary in the coal mine that you can use to kind of skip those and to say, like, this might not be a legitimate resume. I'm going to move on. Maybe I'll come back to it later and double check it. But it's a good opportunity to see that. And unfortunately, with where we're at today, it is something that you need to, if you're doing remote hiring. One thing we found is by just posting local resume or local roles, we've actually found it a lot easier to actually find more qualified talent because we're not necessarily going out to this wide market that has a lot of weirdness in it. And we can easily filter down and be like, okay, well, we're in Arizona. Give me just the Phoenix resumes. Now we want to hire remotely. We still want to have the talent pool across the whole US because we don't really care. But even in those situations, ticking that remote job means that you're going to get a lot more potential noise versus, let's say you post a couple postings in different parts of the country, you're going to get a little less noise, and you can kind of filter down the results a little bit better. If your job's fully remote, you need to validate the person you're interviewing is the person you're hiring. So this is just an unfortunate, weird position that we're in today, where like for eBacon, we will, because of the nature of our business, we'll typically fly somebody in during their first week for training. So that is sometimes used to weed out candidates who are like, well, I can't even come out for one day. I'll never be able to make it to your office. Well, as much as this is a remote position, we still need to do training. We need to get you your laptop. We need to do all the stuff we do. Sometimes it's not feasible for your business if you're doing remote hiring. But we do that as a way also to validate, like, this is the person we're hiring and we're double checking it. If someone's refusing to turn their camera on during an interview, some people don't want to be on camera. That's fine. That could be a red flag too in today's marketplace. You just don't know. And it's a trust-based thing. If they don't trust you enough to turn their camera on during an interview, like they're trying to be an employee with your business, I would probably take that as like, I need some way to validate that person. Feel free to take a screenshot. We've also heard actual situations of the person you're hiring not being the person who comes on day one. And then, they come on day one and then they never turn their camera on, type of thing, right? Like, Again, this is slightly more prevalent in the remote roles. You're not going to see it as much if you're hiring in person. But if you are hiring in person if you're hiring in person but you don't have an in-person step, people are using this in that same way because they're just like, well, I'm a better interviewer than my friend. I'm going to help him get a job, right? You want to make sure you're hiring the person you're talking to in the interview, and it's becoming very easy to fake on AI stuff. Same thing with like LinkedIn. It's amazingly easy to fake LinkedIn. Like you can't take a LinkedIn profile at face value because even in the last round of hiring, we found a lot of LinkedIn profiles, and because AI can now make profile images really well, it's really easy to fake a LinkedIn profile. Like very, very easy, unfortunately. During an interview, we've actually seen people using ChatGPT to respond to our questions in an interview. And this is a weird one because there's, again, a level of like, well, if I expect the candidate to use it, then if they use it during the interview, like, is that a bad thing? It depends. It very much depends on your hiring process, right? But in a lot of ways, we found that when the candidates are doing that, they're not able to actually answer the questions on their own. And you might be hiring for the skill of actually answering the questions versus hiring the robot. Some of the things that I look for, like if people are pausing before they respond to you and they're clearly looking at something on the screen, like maybe they're just reviewing the resume to see what they said on the resume, but we've actually seen people put their resume in the ChatGPT and then ask the question that we're asking, and then they read that off the screen to us. So it can come off as very artificial and fake on that side. Now, as hiring people, sometimes you might do that. You might take a call or you take a thing like, how do I ask this question to this candidate? Again, this is about how you want to handle it. But from a employer perspective, you need to be aware that people are like actively using these things in interviews. Again, double check the time it takes. If they're constantly taking 4 seconds to respond, and you ask them a follow-up question to a question and they can't respond to that question, it's kind of it, or they respond to that question in a way that's like not what you asked or kind of awkward. You got to use your best, not awkward, but you got to use your best judgment from a hiring perspective and candidate screening. And again, you might say, you know what, I don't really care if they use this or not. My goal here is just to let you know that it's not only being used actively, but it's something that I've seen in interviews. And unfortunately, those candidates who do use this openly in an interview, they kind of come off as that way, and they come off as a way that's kind of artificial and not really the person you're talking to. And it makes me kind of wonder about who they would be as candidate or as like employees of the company type of thing. Like at eBacon, we try to have like a more of a conversation like this thing than we have like these 5 standard questions, right? From an interview perspective. So your mileage may vary, but if you think someone's using AI, you might just try to ask questions that would make the AI get weird, or you might try to ask questions, or you might try to ask a lot of follow-up questions, go deep. There's a whole strategy around how you ask those questions, go deeper into an interview. But just beware that's happening. And as I mentioned earlier, adding questions during the resume process to weed out potentially spam posts is a very easy way to make sure you're not just calling up somebody who's not a real person or who's stealing someone's identity to try to get a job. So honestly, you got to come to terms with the fact that like AI is here in recruiting. It's going to be used on both sides. So like on the candidate side, you have to be aware of the candidates using this. On our side, from the employer side, are we using AI? Like at eBacon, how do we use it? Well, a lot of times we're taking that resume and we're putting it into like a tool to parse it out into like a couple sentences, so that when we give it to the hiring manager, we can say, hey, hiring manager, here's 5 people. Here's 5 summaries of those people. And here's the high level, what you got to know. Click on the resume to click to read more, right? It's not that the person putting those summaries together are not reading that thing and going into detail, but kind of going back, it's this next slide, but AI is very good at summarizing things. When you give it a resume and summarize it, or if you give it a resume and say, compare and contrast this against this resume, or take this resume and compare that against a job description, or take this resume and give me some questions that I can ask this candidate. These are all things that are very good for you as a hiring manager or for your hiring management team to leverage on the AI side, with all the privacy, make sure privacy things and stuff like that in context. But everyone's using it in some way, and the most innovation I've seen in HR tools on the applicant tracking side has been indicating that we're going to see more and more AI stuff built into applicant tracking very, very soon. So on that one. So I'm going to leave you with a little bit of just insight into AI and HR software. So we are an HR software company, trying to kind of figure out like, how does this all work together? And a lot of the times for us at eBacon, we found that, again, there's a lot of hype around like, oh, it's going to do everything. It's going to take over the entire world. But really the problems that most companies that we're working with are trying to solve are at a much more fundamental problem than like, can AI take my business over, right? Like AI is not necessarily perfect at helping with the problem of an employee who just doesn't want to punch in every day, right? It could send a message to that employee, but it doesn't solve the problem of my employees don't want to punch in on the right, punch in, or they keep making the wrong choice on jobs. Like there's some things that can help on there, but it's not fundamental. It's a little bit different in the problem set for what it can do. So again, AI Great is like resume scanning. It'll help you evolve quickly and getting a better analysis of some of your candidate. It's important to know the tools are here, but they're just not necessarily operationalized as well as they could be. They're not plugged into things. They're not connected to the right data sources. Microsoft and Google are trying their hardest to do that, but it feels a little tacked on. From a technology perspective, in my opinion, it's not as strong as it could be. And then also kind of like it's pretty good at helping evaluate like actual workforce of resume in the future. At eBacon, some of the use cases that we're looking at with it, where we're implementing it here. So if you use we have an employee review system where you can actually read, do reviews, or have employees do reviews. Like we do pass that if you want to through a summarizer through ChatGPT, so that like it takes like, let's say an employee does a 5-page review, it can take that and summarize it down into 2 paragraphs or 1 paragraph for you. For us, we also have found that like doing things like data scraping with it is really amazing. Like when you look at any of our determinations or like some of the determinations we're pulling from the DIR, from the federal government, those are very hard to get a computer to understand. And in the last 2 years, it's become very easy for a computer to understand how to interpret those and give them to us in a format that we can actually use. We've also found that if you've got a problem, so let's say that someone just comes to your desk and says, I've got 50 pages of this scanned PDF and I want this thing to be in Excel. These AI models are pretty good at moving that data into Excel, or moving, getting that into a format you can use. If you ever have a problem like that, you're just sitting up like, man, like I don't want to have to rekey all this into Excel. I just got this invoice or something and I got to type it all into Excel. You can actually work with your different models to put that document in and say, okay, I want the invoice total, I want this, and put this into Excel for me, which is kind of helpful. And then on our side too, like we use a lot on the software side for some development processes. But again, it's something where like this is very unknown. We're still trying to figure out where we put this into the software. And if you have any suggestions, like feel free to reach out to my email. I'd love to hear them. Because like if you look at a lot of like, there was a lot of articles out there around where we're at today with AI. A lot of companies are actually being warned like you can't just raise your price because you have AI that doesn't do anything for your customer. And we are seeing a lot of places that AI is just kind of being shoved into the 2 things for buzzwords. At eBacon, we're trying to be a little bit more practical of it. Like the summarization on the employee reviews makes sense, but having AI do your payroll might be a little bit of a far reach with today's technology, as an example. So that's kind of like the good, bad, ugly, or good, bad, unknown, good, bad, ugly, whatever. Make sure, again, you're checking out our blog. We do write some posts. I try to, if I see anything major or I see like things that are helpful for you, I will try to write blog posts. Like there's a blog post out there right now that you can read about, some of the more detail of like, how do you ask the opposite questions to the AI, right? How do you have those kinds of conversations with AI that make it a little bit more useful to you? And stay tuned. Like if there's more interest, I'll definitely do more of these webinars. Again, I posted my email in the chat. If you have any specific questions for me, or if you have any like how would you handle this from a hiring perspective? Like we're not consultants, but I'm happy just to answer your questions or talk with you about it, more from just a personal curiosity of how you're going to solve those problems too as a business. So if there's any questions, there's a couple here in the chat right now, but if you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. Otherwise, I appreciate your time today and thank you so much. First question, do you have any tips for quickly scanning resumes? That's a question that's kind of like fraught for difficulty, because I think that there's a different opinion for everybody on that side. I have actually, like, a lot of this is handled by one of our wonderful recruiters at the office today, but I've actually asked this question to people. I asked the question, like, how do you look at a resume and scan it? Because like you only have like a minute or two to really look at a resume. Like people are not spending 20 minutes on per resume. And unfortunately, a lot of candidates think that we spend 20 minutes per resume, right? And a lot of times from my perspective, I'm trying to look to see if the experience is going to match what our business is going to need. And I'm looking at the kind of like, where were they at last? What kind of things have they accomplished? Is the resume formatted in a way that I can actually like go into more depth if I need to? That sounds like a weird thing, but sometimes, especially in my field, we get resumes that are 4, 5, 6, 7 pages long. Those typically are too much to go over, right? And it's usually people who aren't succinct enough on that side. So from my perspective, looking at like making sure it matches the job posting or matches job posting, matches your expectation, kind of adding a consistent format, and then using your applicant tracking tools to filter down. Like, so let's say you're doing a remote position and you've got 5,000 resumes or 1,000 resumes for a remote position, filter them down to your home area first, right? Like, yes, you want all the talent from all the US, but filter down to your home area, filter all the, like for Arizona, we're going to filter all the Arizona ones first and then move just depending on time zone and stuff. It helps a little bit. And even though we love remote employees, it also helps speed up some of that process. Okay, so when conducting video interviews for construction positions, what are some telltale signs that candidate using AI assistance in real time, and how do you address this during the interview? You ask the question. You can ask the question. You can say like, "Oh, are you using any AI tools? Are you, did you use AI for any part of the interview, or type of thing?" They're probably going to tell you no. You know what I mean? Like, unless they're like if it's like a position where you're interviewing and you're looking at like a work sample or something, and you ask them if they've used AI and they say no, and then you ask them to explain it and then they can't explain what they did, then they didn't do the work and they're lying to you, and that's a bad symbol. From a construction perspective, like I don't think it's as fraught for that, but it could be something where, again, if someone's taking a long time to answer a question or just like delayed at every response, or you can hear them typing, or if they've got glasses on, you can see things happening in the background, it's probably an indication that they're doing something, or they're just distracted on the phone call or something like that. That's why, like, if you have local roles you're hiring, having an in-person step is somewhat helpful, especially if you want to make sure that they're real and that the character is the right character and they can have the conversation. But just look for telltale signs of just like delay on the call, or like obvious like screen flashing as you're talking or something like that. So how do you structure the interview process to authenticate technical knowledge and their ability to work independently without AI assistance? That is a big question. It's a great question, but at the same time, it's something where that's gonna, what's the best way to say this? Like the question was like for like field and office work, like project engineers. That's a question that I can't answer right now. That's where like right now things are a little bit more Wild West, which is why you had all those cool robots with hats on it on our interview or on our slides today. I think people are gonna have to figure out a little bit given the nature of the tools, but then they have to ask themselves, how much do I expect the person to understand those tools, right? Like when we're hiring somebody today and we're saying, I really hope they can use Microsoft Excel. Well, in the interview process, you might do a test for Excel, or you might ask questions that like, how do you know how to use Excel? Like when you've used Excel in the past. If you need them to use AI, you might not be as opposed to it, right? You might actually ask, how have you used AI to answer questions, or how, like how familiar are you with using these tools? Like we use them here, type of thing. Again, it's going to be personal, and I feel like this is where we're all kind of figuring things out a little bit. And you just kind of like, I wouldn't necessarily take it as a negative if they don't use it, or a positive if they do use it. It's kind of just more of a, okay, they've used it. And then if you find good uses in your business, you'll want to train for it or try to hire for it in the future. But that's, again, going back to a lot of what I'm trying to say on this conversation. It's a little bit more, it's a little bit more gray right now with like where the impact is. I don't see any other questions here, so I really appreciate everyone jumping on the call today. And there will be, I think we post this out online at some point if you want to watch it back or share it with your friends, or I don't know, whatever else you want to do with a webinar. So have a good rest of your day, and thank you.